Section 4.4 is on adding and subtracting like fractions, how to find the least common denominator, and how to find equivalent fractions. So first of all, let's talk about adding like fractions. Fractions with the same denominator are called like fractions. If they have different denominators, they are unlike fractions. So an example of a like fractions are 2/5 and 3/5. They both have a common denominator of 5. Unlike fractions would be 2/5 and 3/4 because they have different denominators. So everything in this section will be how to add like fractions, because in order to add fractions, they must have a common denominator. You can only add and subtract like fractions. So to add and subtract like fractions, remember they have to have the same denominator, what you do is you add their numerators together. So a over b plus c over b is a plus c over b. You'll see the denominator stays the same, and you add their numerators. The same thing when you subtract. A over b minus c over b will give you a minus c all over that common denominator of b. So let's look at some examples of that. Again, these will be on your handout if you have that with you, hopefully. So examples, 3/8 plus 2/8. Because they have a common denominator of 8, we know we can add them together. To add them, we add their numerators. 3 plus 2 gives us 5, and the denominator stays the same. So 3/8 plus 2/8 gives us 5/8. Let's look at letter B on your handout. Letter B says 1/6 plus 3/6. You'll notice they have a common denominator of 6, so we can add them together. Add their numerators. 1 plus 3 is 4. Keep the denominator the same, 6. 4/6 would be the answer. Make sure you can reduce it, or check if you can reduce it. 2 goes into 4 twice, and 2 goes into 6 3 times. So 1/6 plus 3/6 is 4/6, which reduces to 2/3. Okay, let's look at letter C. 5 over 8x plus 1 over 8x. They have a common denominator. They are like fractions, so you can add them together. Add their numerators. 5 plus 1 is 6, and you get 6 over 8. Make sure to check to see if you can simplify it. 6 and 8 can be reduced because 2 goes into both. So you get 3 over 4x. Again, if there's an x, the x just comes along in the denominator. Letter D says 3/8 plus 5/8 plus 4/8. You'll see they all have a common denominator. They are like fractions, so we can add them together. Add their numerators, and you get 12/8, which as a mixed number is 1 and 4/8, which reduces to 1 1/2. So that's how you add and subtract. I guess those are all add like fractions. To subtract, similarly, 8/9 minus 1/9. You subtract their numerators. 8 minus 1 is 7, so 7/9. For letter B, 7/8 minus 5/8 would give us 2/8, which reduces to 1/4. Alright, for letter C, I'll do this one on the board with you. Negative 11/8 plus 6/8. This is an addition problem. This negative out here sometimes can be a little bit tricky. Negative 11/8, the negative can be written out in front. It can be written in the numerator as negative 11 over 8. Because remember, this is a division problem. If there's one negative, it's negative. Or you could write it in the denominator as negative 8. Now you wouldn't want to write it in the denominator because then they would not be like fractions. One would be negative 8 and one would be positive 8. Okay, and we want them to be like. So if there's a negative in front, we don't consider it to go with the denominator because we need to have like fractions. So instead we consider it to be part of the numerator. Negative 11 over 8 is the same thing as negative 11/8 because if there's one negative, the answer is negative. So to add these, we keep our common denominator of 8. Negative 11 plus 6 is negative 5. So we get negative 5/8. So if there's a negative in the problem, on the fraction, move it to the numerator and add them together or subtract them and keep your common denominator. So why don't you try to do letter D on your handout? Negative 5/8 minus 1/8. And we'll go over that in class. Make sure you bring it to class with you. Alright, sometimes they get a little bit more tricky when there's variables involved. Subtract 3x over 4 minus 7 over 4. You'll see in this problem they do have a common denominator of 4, so we can subtract their numerators. Okay, when you subtract their numerators, 3x minus 7 is something we cannot reduce. We cannot subtract 3x's minus 7 because we can only add and subtract like terms. Okay, so you can't, 3x minus 7 is not negative 4x because there's no x involved. It's just 3x over 7, or 3x minus 7 over 4. So why don't you try to do on your handout letter F, 2/5 minus 7y over 5. Remember, you cannot subtract 2 minus 7y, so make sure you leave it like that. And then letter G says to subtract 3/7 minus 4/7 minus 5/7. When you're subtracting with negatives again, it's a good idea to switch them to plus to add the opposite. So instead of minus 4, maybe it's best to switch it to plus negative 4. Instead of minus 5, switch it to plus negative 5. Now we can just add them. 3 plus negative 4 plus negative 5 all over our common denominator of 7. So 3 plus negative 4 is negative 1, plus negative 5 is negative 6 over 7, or negative 6/7. So remember, when it's a subtraction problem, it's often a good idea to switch it to add the opposite when there's negatives involved. Okay, so that's it for the first part on how to add and subtract like fractions. Next, we're going to talk about how to find what do you do when they aren't like fractions. So that'll be in the next video, as I'm going to split up section 4.4 into 2 videos. So go ahead and watch that one next. Thank you.